Welcome back. It's a fact that we all make mistakes, myself included. I've made too many mistakes to count in my life, as well as in my code. For every mistake you actually see where I have a syntax error, I sometimes leave them in, but there's probably 5 or 10 behind the scenes that I edit out. It can be hard, when you're typing and talking at the same time. But also just when I'm not making classes, I'm just writing code, I make mistakes all the time. Whether it's a human error, syntax error, like adding in a semicolon when I don't need one because I'm confusing coming from JavaScript to Python and switching back and forth a couple times during one day. Or maybe it's a computer or code to code error, like if I have a database and it's supposed to be running, but the database for some reason crashed and my code is trying to connect to it. That's not necessarily something that I did as a human. I didn't type something wrong, but things aren't acting how they're supposed to. They're not behaving the way they're intended to. That's a problem. So the point is, errors happen all the time, whether it's from things we do wrong or from things failing when they're not supposed to fail or from servers not being up. Things just happen. So how do we fix them is a really, really important part of being a developer. And the first step to preventing them and then fixing them is just understanding them. So we're going to start by just going over some of the common Python errors. We're not going to go over every single one, but just some of the common ones and reviewing a lot of the ones you've already seen. And we'll go pretty quick. And first up is our good old syntax error. So we've seen this one a lot, or I have, as I've been typing and recording into the microphone. And it just occurs when Python encounters some wrong syntax, something that isn't valid Python, that it can't parse. Usually due to typos. So here's an example. If we have def first and no parentheses and then a colon, that's going to confuse Python because as it parses, it says, all right, this is a function, so I should expect parentheses after the name. There's no parens, and so it gets confused. Same thing here where we have none equals 1. That's invalid Python. Or just returning something, or if we had a semicolon just in the middle of our code or something like that, that could cause problems. So that would be a syntax error. For example, there we go, invalid syntax. Or just to show you, def name, and then let's do 2 parentheses the wrong way, syntax error. All right, so we've seen plenty of those. Next up is a name error. So a name error occurs when a variable is not defined, meaning it hasn't been assigned yet. So here's an example. This example assumes that test has not been defined, and if I just refer to test, we get a name error. We've seen that before as well. If I just type test right now, we get a name error. Any other variable that's non-existent, like r or person, none of these exist. Perso, person, every time we get a name error. Python is just telling us, I don't know what that thing is. So that's different than a syntax error, obviously. It conveys something different in the type of error. Next up is type error. So a type error occurs when basically you have a mismatch of data types. So an operation or function is applied to the wrong type, and Python just can't figure out what to do. So for example, if we call len on 5, well, an integer itself doesn't have a length, so it gives us a type error. Same thing if we try and add a string to a list, type error. So we could do 3 plus s, we get a type error, and it explains unsupported operand types for plus between an int and a string. If I tried to do len of a float, same thing, type error. Object of type float has no length. Change it to a string though, we don't get a type error because strings are one of the types that has a length. Next up, index error. So an index error happens when you try and access an element in a list using an invalid index. We've seen this before. I remember I deliberately showed what happened if you tried to access a list with an index that doesn't exist. And the same applies to a string. So if we had this list, it just has a single element, so the highest index is 0. If I try and access a list of 2, we're going to get an index error. Same thing with strings. So if I have a string called name equals Colt, and then I try and access name of 0, that's fine. But name of 4 causes a problem. Index error, string index out of range. Same thing if I have a tuple, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I try and access nums of 6, index error, tuple out of range, and same with a list as well. Next up is value error. So this happens when a built-in operation or function receives an argument that has the right type, but an inappropriate value. For example, when we've been calling int to convert a string most often to an int, if we pass in the string of 5, then that works, and it gives us the int of 5. But if we pass in string foo, well, a string is okay. That's not the problem. It's not a type error. The problem is that it contains the string foo instead of a number that can be converted. Okay? So if I did int and I tried to pass in a list of, containing the string f or even the string 10, that doesn't work because that's a type error. It's not expecting a list. It's not set up to convert lists. So we get a type error. But if I do int and I pass in the string 10, that works fine. It expects a string, but if I do a string of f, that's a problem. Value error. Invalid literal for int with base 10. It doesn't like the string f, but it doesn't hate all strings. So that's what a value error tells us. Next up, key error. So key errors occur with dictionaries when you try and access or retrieve something from a dictionary with a key and it does not have that specific key. So for example, we have an empty dictionary, D, and I try and access anything in there, whatever the key is, we get a key error. So it's sort of like the index error for a list, but for a dictionary, we get a key error. And there's just one more I'll show you. I should be clear, there are more than what I'm displaying here. I mean, there's very specific errors, like a divide by 0 error. I just decided not to go into detail about all of them because whenever you get an error, it's pretty self-explanatory. It explains what it is, and you could just look it up, Google, copy and paste, and see what you get. But I just want to highlight the common ones. I should have started off by saying that. Anyway, the last one, attribute error. So this occurs when a variable does not have an attribute. So for example, awesome.foo, awesome is a string, and if I try and access foo on awesome, it's just not a thing, so I get this attribute error. Same thing, if I had a list, 1, 2, 3, and I try and call a method called, hello, I get an attribute error. It basically is Python telling me, okay, I just can't find anything called hello on this particular list or string, whatever we've been working with. So we've seen how to do, string.join. And I think if I call it like this with an empty list, yeah, it gives me a type error because I didn't pass the arguments. So let's just pass in, 1 and do A and B. And I get AB. All right, that's not the point. But if I tried to call joint, now we get an attribute error. It tells me, I don't know what you're talking about. String object has no attribute, joint. Okay, so that was just a quick overview of some of the most common errors. If you go in the docs, we can see there's a ton of them. Import errors, memory errors, indentation error. I've definitely seen that one before. Tab error, so that's when you're mixing up tabs and spaces. What else? Zero division, that's the one I was talking about. Deprecation warning, import warning, runtime. Anyway, there's just a ton of them. So if you do want to take a look, feel free to study these. But like I said, most of the common ones we already talked about. And when something pops up, just copy and paste, Google it, and see what it actually means if you're confused. Okay, so now that we've seen some of the common errors, next I'm actually going to show you how to make your own to raise an error whenever you want.